Hey everyone, Gaijin Goombah here. You know, for as much as I've covered the culture behind Nintendo's games, from Mario airlifting Nintendo's domestic culture in Japan, to The Legend of Zelda's roots in Celtic mythos, I recently realized there's one major Nintendo property I have never once covered in my 6 years of making content. Kirby. And that's actually pretty bizarre to me in hindsight, because underneath Kirby's calm, cute, and simplistic gameplay are cultural inspirations that span coast to coast all over the world. And much like the driving force of Team Fortress 2, it's all about the hats. From Kirby Superstar on the SNES till today, with Crystal Shards being the exception, Kirby's abilities have always been represented by different kinds of hats as a way to distinguish each ability. Some of the hats were simple choices, like Sleep being a nightcap, Fighter being a bandana, and Cook being a chef's hat. But there were so many others that held cultural references within them. Like the Wing ability's flowing feathered headdress that gave Kirby the ability to shoot feathers and dive bomb his enemies. This hat is known as a double trailer war bonnet. Now, we tend to see these as just another stereotypical aspect of Native American culture, but in reality, this decorative headwear was insanely important to the plains natives. Why? Because chiefs and warriors weren't simply given a huge headpiece of feathers to wear for formality or ceremony. Every single feather told a story. Each one was earned either through an act of courage on the battlefield or given to them by the current chief for a selfless act on behalf of the tribe. And as the eagle was seen as the strongest of all animals, it was its feathers that hallmarked the greatest of feats from the members of the tribes. That's why these days it feels like such a grave offense when these headdresses are only seen as a fashion statement made by others. Anyway, as the Kirby series progressed, more and more hats popped into play, most of which had simple historical backgrounds. Painter Kirby? A beret that was made popular by Richard Wagner, Rembrandt, and other artists. Yo-Yo Kirby? Whoa, 90s backwards cap! Dr. Kirby? Well, yeah, before the advent of handheld lit magnifying devices, head mirrors were actually a pretty fantastic device that doctors would use to redirect light while inspecting the body. And there were some popular cultural references, such as Archer Kirby being Robin Hood and Whip Kirby being Indiana Jones. But then there were a few hats that just didn't seem to make any sense. Like, why exactly does Beam Kirby use a jester hat? I mean, sure, perhaps court jesters knew a few magic tricks, but not high-powered energy blasts! So today, in honor of Star Allies, I want to break down some of the weirdest choices for Kirby's ability hats the franchise has ever seen, and explain why they really aren't as bizarre as you might think. And no, I honestly have no idea why Beam Kirby uses a jester hat. Starting with the ability wholly original to Star Allies, the stick ability. Now, granted, if you're an anime fan or you paid attention to your middle school literature class, this one might seem familiar. But for the rest of you scratching your heads, let's leave Nintendo momentarily and hop over the Sea of Japan into China, where we find the origin of not only this hat, but the copy ability itself. A 16th century literature classic, Shioji, or Journey to the West. An epic tale involving a ragtag group of demons turned Buddhists as they lead a monk from China to India in search of sacred sutras. Starring the biggest jerk between heaven and hell, Sun Wukong, the Monkey King. Seriously, this guy was a terror. His entire existence was proving how much stronger he was than anything and everything else. After dominating every rival on Earth that he had, he fought and decimated the armies of heaven and Hades until the Buddha himself had to trap him under a mountain. But in a show of mercy, the Bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, said they would free Sun Wukong if he assisted the monk named Tan Sensang in his journey to India. Seeing freedom, Sun agreed, but the Bodhisattva was wise to Sun's tricks. They placed on Sun Wukong's head a glimmering golden band that couldn't be removed, and instructed Tang that if Wukong ever got out of line to chant a special sutra and the band would shrink, causing Wukong great pain. Looking back to Kirby's stick ability hat, it bears a striking resemblance to Wukong's band, gold curling up in the middle. But then you have Kirby's stick itself, and this thing is pretty dang malleable. Bending and stretching to all different kinds of lengths. Well, Sun Wukong's weapon, the Gaijin Goombah, was no different. A double golden-tipped rod that could change size at his disclosure. Next, for any fan of Dragon Ball that might have been bored during that explanation, this one's for you, because there's another copy ability hat I am convinced is solely tied to that freaking franchise. Cutter. Yeah, one of the most iconic and recognizable copy abilities in the entire Kirby series actually has more to do with popular culture than historic. But let's look at the hat itself, cause this one really confused me as a kid. You have the cutter blade that goes down the middle of the hat, which, okay, fair, the Sir Kibbles have a helmet that functions the exact same way, but then you got eyeballs and freaking wings on this hat. Why? This ain't Mario 64, what's the point? Well, if you're a hardcore Jump fan, you might recall an adorable little android named Arale. She was the star of Toriyama's previous series, Dr. Slump, but she's made regular appearances in Dragon Ball and had a guest episode in Dragon Ball Super. Notice anything particular about this character? Dad Hat. Though it bears her namesake across the front, Arale's hat has familiar wings going down the side of her baseball cap. The other half of this mystery resides in another adorable female character from Dragon Ball, Chi-Chi. Well, before her Tiger Mom phase. On her helmet is a bladed crescent, which, much like Kirby and Sir Kibbles, she plucks off her head and launches at her enemies. And yeah, if Master Roshi was any example, it cuts pretty deep. I know that the popular theory is that the cutter design came from Ultra 7, but the combination of Chi-Chi's helmet blade and Arale's wing cap makes for stronger evidence comparatively. And who knows, maybe the folks at HAL were big Shonen Jump fans. Now let's hop all the way back to North America because the wing headdress isn't the only copy ability had to have come out of this continent. In Kirby Planet Robobot, the poison ability made its debut, replacing water from Return to Dreamland. And yeah, on the surface, this seems simple enough, right? The purple goo coming out of the top is obviously poison, and the skull in the front is as stereotypical as you can get when it comes to symbolism. But do you remember the phrase, red on black, friend of Jack, and red on yellow, one dead fellow? Well, Kirby sure ain't a friend of Jack because the band around his head shares the exact same pattern of the coral snake, the most poisonous serpent in North America. The pain that comes with the venom is pretty marginal, but if it's not treated immediately, the coral snake's neurotoxin will actually shut down your entire respiratory system, effectively making you suffocate to death. And yeah, that's a pretty fitting choice of design for poison, Kirby. Next, let's talk about the most OP ability in the game, Hammer. No, really, this thing can one-shot bosses if your timing's good. Despite the straightforward design of this ability, I mean you're holding a hammer, Kirby also wears a white tied-off headband. As a kid, again, I had no idea why. Seems just like having a hammer was enough, but looking back now, I can't believe I didn't see this before. Kirby is wearing what's known as a Hachimaki headband. Originally, these headbands were worn to keep samurai's helmets on, but over time they became symbols of perseverance and determination. And these were thought to be worn by everybody who was trying to get through something, from studying hard students to even women in labor. But what does that have to do with hammers? Well, every New Year in Japan, there's a big event known as Mochizuki, a time where families will take a sum of their harvested rice from the previous fall and pound it with a hammer into mochi. That sounds simple, right? Well, just watch some of these pro pounders in action. Yeah, this takes not only a whole lot of endurance, but some god-tier timing, and it's an exhausting process that can wear you down in minutes. Thus, a lot of mochi pounders will wear Hachimaki as a symbol of their determination to get their job done. Finally, let's talk about the most perplexing hat I've ever seen in this franchise, the bomb hat. Now, for the first couple of games, Kirby would don a hat identical to the Poppy Bros, which made sense as they shared the same ability. But when Return to Dreamland rolled out, Kirby's rocking this princess cone in lieu of the Poppy Bros hat, and why? How in the world could there be any connection between the ultimate symbol of European womanhood and one of the most destructive weapons mankind's ever created? It's something that I've been pondering ever since the game came out. But thanks to extra credits who've been covering the life of Genghis Khan, I actually stumbled on the one thing that brought these two iconic symbols together: the Mongols. You ever wonder where the stereotypical princess cone came from? Cause it won Europe! The concept was actually imported into the West from the Great Mongol Empire in 1279. See, back then, from the eastern coasts of China to Turkey to the borders of Hungary, Genghis Khan held territory throughout the majority of Asia and even parts of Eastern Europe. With such a massive expansion of the empire came with it cultural integrations from the Mongols as well, the flashiest of which was the bokta, or kuku as it was also called, an exceptionally tall and lavish hat that married Mongol women would don, and when I say this thing was tall, I mean it could be anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall. The higher the hat, the higher in society these women were. Over time, this lavish hat made its way into the hands of Central and Western Europe as the Mongolian Empire was right on their doorstep, where women fell in love with the lavish design of the headdress and redesigned them into heinen hats. But seeing as they lacked the peacock feathers and precious metals that the Mongol women would use, European women would dress their heinen hats in silk and lace streamers. Thus, the iconic hat of noble European ladies was created, and for some reason Kirby equips it when he's got the ability to lob ordnance around. Now, let me back up a bit, because before anyone makes the assumption that these high-class Mongol women were little more than flashy figureheads, buddy, these weren't just Mongol queens, they were war queens. Just as they shared many of the same responsibilities of their male counterparts in the steppe, so too did they share their ferocity on the battlefield. In fact, one historian was quoted in saying that Mongol war queens would viciously fight with their infant children still strapped on their backs. Yeah, not sure if such a thing was true or not, but it definitely illustrates the Mongols' capacity for war despite gender segregation. And it's that tradition of war that brings us to the other aspect of Bomb Kirby, the bombs themselves. As the Mongol Empire spread south to China and Korea, the Great Horde also took a stab at Japan in 1274 under Kublai Khan. But unlike the Japanese who still fought with sword and bow, the Mongols took a page out of China's technological advances and created stoneware bombs to shell the Japanese military, either by hand or by catapult. This was seen as the precursor to modern military warfare, and the Mongols almost won out if it wasn't for a massive typhoon that swept them back to China. And yeah, you better believe there were Mongol war queens on the battlefield chucking bombs at samurai. So despite Bomb Kirby's change in headwear to something a bit more frilly, culturally and historically speaking, it makes perfect sense. I could honestly keep going on and on with these references. I mean, just looking at Stone Kirby gives me some hardcore terracotta soldier vibes with his Chinese helmet, but I think I better wrap it up for now. However, there's one other power I had to talk about in detail. One that honestly needed its own video. Ninja Kirby. I mean, come on, I got an entire show dedicated to the concept, how could I not? So if you want to check out my new episode of Witch Ninja on Kirby, check out those annotations and links below. But if you're looking for something a bit more scientific, I suggest MatPat's game theory over what the heck Kirby actually is. It's a pretty fascinating look into the pink boy using microbiology of all things. But thanks for watching, everyone.